Okay, so I wanted to show you how I finished back of my hoop. This isn't the way that everyone does it, and I think it's about having a play with different sort of styles and seeing what works for you. But I wanted to show you a quick video just showing how I prefer to do it on mine. So I've got my hoop, and this is one of the ones that I've decorated with washi tape that came with one of the Cotton and Twine subscription boxes. I've got my finished cross stitch, and I've pressed it as much as possible to get the hoop mark out of it, but I'm not stressing too much about it being completely flat. I've got a pair of pinking shears. I've got a piece of, this is Gutermann Sew All thread. You don't have to use this sort of thread, you can use whatever threads to hand, and I would recommend using a thread that's the same colour as your Aida. I'm just using it in the purple so that you can see what it looks like and what it is that I'm doing. And then obviously I've got my needle for doing it as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen the screw on my hoop. I'm going to take out the inside of the hoop. I'm going to pop that so that my cross stitch is on top of the inner part of the hoop, and then I'm going to loosen this as much as possible. Because I've added the washi tape to it, this has added a lot of padding around it, so I'm going to need it fairly wide. And I'm just going to try and line it up so that the top, my cross stitch with the bumblebee, is in line with the top of my hoop as well. And if you're happy with how it is, then I would just tighten it up a little bit, and then you can sort of see that as I've started to tighten it, it's started to bunch up here. So I'm then just going to gently sort of tease it out all around the edges, because you want it to be nice and taut. And then I'm going to tighten it up a little bit more, and you kind of keep going through this process of tightening it up a little bit, pulling the Aida, and as you can see, I'm holding the hoop. So I've got one finger holding it this side and my thumb holding it this side, because otherwise sometimes the hoop can just spring out of place and your cross stitch will come flying out, which I've done multiple times. And then I'm just going to keep tightening it until I'm happy with how it is. I've then gone round and used a pair of pinking shears, which you can see cuts a zigzag out of the Aida. So I've literally worked my way all the way around, just snipping it roughly about an inch away from the hoop. Now the reason I do it with the pinking shears is because it cuts this zigzag, which means that the Aida is less likely to fray. And I've given it an inch all the way around because I'm then going to gather it up at the back. Now some people might use felt or fabric and sort of finish the back of the hoop so it's fully enclosed, and that's absolutely fine. The other way you could do it is to use pinking shears again, but I would do around about 1/4 of an inch or maybe 1/2 an inch, and then you're going to apply a thin layer with a glue gun all the way around that inside of the inner hoop. And then you can stick the seam allowance of your Aida all the way around, and that would stick it all down as well. I guess it sort of depends what it is that you want to do with it afterwards. With the glue gun, you're not really able to reuse the hoop, and I quite like the option of being able to reuse the hoop if I needed to. So I have done the pinking shears. I'm going to get rid of this excess fabric, and I've cut the excess fabric out so that I've got a rough circle. I didn't draw it out or anything, I just followed the hoop as a guide, with about an inch seam allowance. I'm then going to use this Gutermann thread. Now I quite like this just because I find it quite strong. The polyester thread I find really strong for doing it. Now the length that you want your thread for gathering the hoop is going to be twice all the way around. So I'm going to go all the way around to roughly measure back to the start, and then I'm going to go round for a second time, and it'll make sense in a minute why I've done 2 rounds. So once I've laid the thread out roughly and it's gone round the circle twice, I'm then just going to snip the thread. I'm going to find these 2 ends of the thread. So I'm not going to tie a knot or anything, I've just got one long piece of thread which is gone twice around your hoop. I'm then going to get these 2 ends of the thread here, and I'm going to thread my needle up. So I've lined them up so they're nice and tight together, and then I'm just going to bring my needle down on top there. I'm going to pull this through so it's around about 5 inches of a tail. And again, I think, you know, how long this excess bit here is up to you, and kind of you get used to how you prefer to sew. So I'm going to start at the back here, and I'm going to start around about a quarter of the way in from the outside edge, and I'm going to come through here. So I've come in, I'm working on the back of my hoop. I'm going to bring the needle in from the back of the hoop, go through the Aida, and then bring it back out around about a quarter of an inch. Pull it all the way through, and you can see because it's one long piece of thread and we brought the two ends up together, you've now got a loop. So instead of tying a knot, I'm going to pass my needle through that loop, and that has now secured the thread to the Aida as we're doing it. I'm now going to take some really big stitches, and these are going to be around about half an inch in length and then half an inch gap. And you can see I'm doing several at a time, and then I'm just going to pull the needle through. And I'm just going to work my way around about a quarter of an inch in from the outside edge. And I'm just doing these big stitches. You have to make sure that your scissors are out the way, otherwise, like me, you'll get it caught up. And you're just going to keep going all the way around your Aida. If at any point you feel that the tail of your thread is going to catch up in this, you just want to loosen the tail slightly. So you do that by holding the base of the thread and pulling the needle slightly further away from you, and that will just shorten that tail. Otherwise, if the tail gets caught in it as well, then you're going to end up sewing with 4 strands of thread. And again, the reason I do it with one strand folded in half is then you've essentially got 2 strands, which makes it even stronger for when we do this bit, which is you start to pull it up like this, and you can see it gathers it in, and we're just going to pull it through to the back. So just keep working your way all the way around. And if you want to like slightly gather it as you sew, then that's absolutely fine. It starts to give you a bit more thread to play with as you're working your way around. And again, this is going to be on the back of your work, so really don't worry about it needing to be precise or neat. If you've used a thread that's the same colour as your Aida, then obviously it's not going to show by the time it's all gathered in at the back. It's just I wanted you to be able to see it on the video, so you could sort of see what it is that I'm doing. And you're just going to keep going until you get back to where you started. So I've got back to where I've started. I'm actually just going to take a couple of extra stitches slightly beyond where it was that I started. And this is just so that I know that it's all going to be gathered properly. And then at this point, I'm coming out at the same point as one of my previous stitches. Now, before I tie the knot on the back of the work, you just want to gather it all in. And to do that, I'm pulling very gently because you don't want your thread to snap. And this is why I quite like using the polyester thread, just because I find it holds these stitches and it holds that pulling. And then you can turn it over and lay it flat on the table and just check, and it should, if it's gathered properly, it should lie flat on your table, which means it'll lie flat on the wall. So at this point, I'm then going to pick the needle back up, and I'm just going to go through here. So I'm going to bring the needle back out. So I've now gathered it as tightly as I possibly can. You can see it here. And I'm just going to take another stitch and pull it. And then I'm going to go through here. So I'm literally going through maybe two holes of the Aida and going back a little bit and pulling the needle through. And you can see how there it's just created a smaller stitch on this side of the work now. Again, I'm just going to make sure that this is as tight as I can possibly get it. I'm then going to do another stitch in exactly the same spot. So I'm going to do 3 stitches in the same spot just to make sure this is really nice and secure. And this time, this is the 3rd stitch now. And you can see before I've pulled it all the way through, there's an ever so slight loop here before I pull it all the way through in that third stitch. So I'm going to pass my needle through that loop, and I'm going to do it twice. So once, twice. I'm going to pull the needle through and pull that nice and tight, and you should be able to feel that that's made a knot there in the back of your work. And that means this is nice and secure here. And then I've just trimmed the thread so it's about 1/4 of an inch of thread left on it. And then that is nice and gathered at the back, so it's going to lay nice and flat against the wall. And that is how I like to gather in the back of my cross stitch on a hoop.